Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Kiddushin daf Yud Gimel. We are going to begin on Yud Beis and Mid Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom. Hahu Gavra. There was a man, the Kaddish Besifta da Asa. He was Mekadosh a woman, Rashi says, with Machsel Shel Hadas, with mats made out of myrtle. So Amrule, Vaholes Moshiva Pruta. What's the point? It's nothing. It's not even worth a pruta. And therefore, they certainly are not married. So, Armulhu, Tikadish be'armezuzid ispa. The truth is, there is inside, wrapped up inside, there is 4 zuz. So, since that's the case, he really is giving her something which is substantially more than a sheva pruta. So, shikalta. So she took the money, the ishtika, and she was silent. So Rashi says, "Kloimer natala v'lo hishlichasa," like she didn't give it back. Ishtika, she's like, "Okay, I'll keep the money." Now the question is, when she received it, she received this mat maybe without the understanding of what was in it, and now she's keeping the money. We don't know if she's actually makabel that money l'shem Kiddushin, therefore they're married or not. So Omer Rabba havishtikus l'dolachar matan mois, l'choshtikus l'achar matan mois lav klomhi. In this situation, it's l'achar matan mois, says Rashi. Shemitchila kishikiblasa, when she originally accepted it, v'mois haya b'tocha, the money was inside. Lo yada behen, she didn't know about that money, and therefore says Rashi, ukashi yada achar kain. Afterwards, she found out that what she accepted had this money, Vishaska, and she was quiet. It's nothing. The high shaska, the fact that she was silent, maybe is mishumdol ivchasla. She doesn't care. Maybe Amr, she thought, mikar lavadaita the hachi kablasinu, that she wasn't makabel this mat on condition to take this money because she didn't know about the money. And it was less than a shiva pruta. Maybe it was obvious to her it was less than a shiva pruta, and therefore she's not really married. So maybe that's in fact the din. So the Gemara says, okay, how do we know that when a woman is silent in this situation, which is shtika lachama and mais, that we say the din is lav klumhi, that it's not a Kiddushin, Desanya. I'll prove it to you in the following situation. Amrullah kinsi selazu bipikadain. If a person says that marry me with this pikadon, okay, kinsi sela zu b'pikadon, that there is this sela in a pikadon, because of amrullah hiskachli boy, and then afterwards he originally said just hold on to it as a pikadon, and then afterwards he said I want you to marry me with this, which means it was liachar and mois. She was already makabel this money, right? She was makabel the money, but she was makabel it out a pikadon, not l'shem Kiddushin. So therefore, what's the din? So the Gemara says as follows: b'shas matan mois miskadeshes. So the Reisha says like this: if it was b'shas matan mois, that this whole took place before she even received the money, says Rashi, im kaidim shekiblasan, before she got it, he said hiskachlibo mukadeshes dechi kibalte adaita dehachi kabalte, because when she was makabel it, she was makabel it on the condition that, okay, this is Kiddushin money. So even though originally he said it was a pikadain, but since he changed his mind before he gave it to her, so therefore certainly it works. Okay, now la'achar ma'an mois, however, let's say that he gave it to her first, and then afterwards he mentions his whole Kiddushin business. So it depends. Ratzatza mikadeshes, lo ratzatza any mikadeshes. Now it's hard to understand what this means. If she wants it, they're married. If she doesn't want, she's not married. Now my ratzatza, my lo ratzatza. Ilim ratzatza di amr in. She says yes, so it's pretty obvious that she wants. Lo ratzatza di amr lo. She doesn't want. She says no, I'm not interested. So Machal the Reisha of the case above, B'shas matan mois, in which we are not making a distinction between Ratza Lo Ratza, then either situation they're married, even the case where Lo Ratza says, the Gemara in Yud Gimel and Aleph, Ki Amr Lo Nami have a Kiddushin, Amayim Al Kamri Lo. If it was a person has money, and he says, marry me with this money, and he sticks it into her hand, and she goes, no! Obviously they're not married. So you can't say Lo Ratzatza is talking about a case of no, because then you would say the Reisha is either way it's a good Kiddushin. Why? Why would Lo Ratzatza be a good Kiddushin? So it must be different. El Lav Ratzatza Demar in. Rather, you have to read it like this. Ratzatza means that she said yes. Okay, that makes sense. They're married. However, Lo Ratzatza de Ishtika. She was silent. She said nothing. Now, says the Gemara, Ishtika Mishtaka. She was silent. So this is Takaraya that it is not good. Okay, let's look at TA9. Maybe we hit the whole question. Armula Kinti Sela Zu Baby Kadling. Because of it, Armula Hiskachili Boy. Ratzas Mukdashas, Ratzas Mukdashas. Makavana Lo Ratzasa. The Ezer Klal Shaminan Mihacha. Lo Ratzasa means Shtika, Shmamina, Shtika, Lachamat and Mais, Lav Klumhi. Okay, so that again is a proof. The fact that she said nothing means nothing. Saying nothing means nothing. I mean, it doesn't mean that she accepted it willingly. Okay. They asked the following question: Midami, how can you compare this case to the case we started off with? Hasam b'taris pikadan yahavdinu nihila. Originally, he gave it to her to be cuddling. She accepts it, and now we say, okay, now it's totally ratzah lo ratzah. Ratzah, she says yes. Lo ratzah means she's sasek. So Savar, maybe she thinks like this: Isha dinuhu, if I throw it down, umitavri, and I break it, michayv nebahu. I'm going to be chayiv because since it was given to me as a pikadon, so therefore I have an obligation of shmira. I have a chayiv to have to watch it. However, hacha, when it comes to this this mat of asa, b'teres kedushin yavinu niyah. It was only given to her as kedushin. Now it was pachas m'shever pruta, but she was mekalbas pruta. So v'isa delay nichala lishdinu. She should have just immediately thrown it off or thrown it away immediately. The fact that she accepted it, maybe then itself changes things, and therefore maybe in that situation, even though she was silent, maybe that is still good enough. That's still kedushin, right? It says Rashi umidoloi shedatinhu. The fact that she didn't cast it, maybe that's a raya shmamina nitzras b'kedushin, that she actually wanted the kedushin. So in other words, how do we know that? How do we know how to define shtika? What is shtika? Is silence acceptance or not acceptance? So maybe in the Reisha silent, this case rather of the bikadain that we brought down is not a raya because her silence doesn't mean that she wants kedushin. She's just petrified to lose it, to destroy it. She'll have to pay for it. You break it, you buy it. However, in this case, it was only l'shem kedushin. So parach ravachai atu what? Kuhu nashi dina gemire. You're telling me that this woman is able to chap. Then I was accepted bibikadain. So if I should throw it down, if I don't throw it down, I'm right. Maybe it's not a raya. That because maybe I'd be chayiv. However, when it comes to kedushin, I was mekal for kedushin. Does a woman really? Not that women don't know laws, but when you're dealing with a situation, how do we know that she understands all the intricate details? She's accepting it. Hachinami svara. Again, atu kuhunashi dina gemiri. Hachinami svara. Savar isha dinulhu umitavri mischayvna be'achor rachasayu. Which, by the way, it's a pretty good point. If a woman is given an engagement ring, and she goes, I don't want it, and she just tosses it and throws it in the garbage, it sounds that she wasn't makabel the kedushin, and why didn't she just give it back to him? Why did she throw it and destroy it? Right? Maybe she is responsible. Like, how do we know that these dinim are different And how would a woman know the halachic difference because she was makabel upon herself some din of shmira? So, but Shia, you can just destroy something of someone else's, right? What right do you have to do that? You can't just you can't be a mazik. You can't destroy someone's things. So Shalcha Rav Achabar Rav L'Kamed Ravina Sochia Gavdamai. So, what exactly is the din over here? What's the situation? Shalcha Anan Lo Shmielon Hada Rav Huda Bered Rav Yeshua. I didn't hear it. Atun Shmiel you Chushu Law. You should be chayish. And it says Rashi Vatzrachua Gita that you should taka require a get. Because in this situation, we don't know. Even though it's true that you can maybe say, well, the fact that she was makabel it, right? So again, maybe shtikal achar matan mois is nothing. So she shouldn't need a get. Or we should say, you know what? Maybe there is a distinction. And because there's a chiluk, so maybe you would think in this situation, shtika does mean something. And therefore, shtikal achar matan mois could potentially mean still Kiddushin. And therefore, you should force her to receive a get. Hayissa. So, actually, let's see if there's another question on this. Okay. Hayissa dahavika mezavna varshachei. So you had this woman, and she was selling varshachei. Rashi says this is referring to, it just says bindles, like bundles. Now, Rashi says, brings down over here, on the side, the parish, in the Maseres Shas on the side, chavilus meshi. So like bundles of silk. Also, hu gaver chatof varshacha mina. So a guy walked up to her and grabbed her silk that she was selling. So Amalei, Havanihili, what are you doing? Give it back. It's my silk I'm selling. Amalei, if I give it back to you, Mikadeshesli, you'll be married to me. So shekalte vishtika. She grabbed it and was silent. And Rabbi Nachman Yechayel Meimer in Shakli Didi Shakli. Yeah, I took it, but it wasn't his, it was mine. I took back what was mine. And therefore, certainly we're not married. So, Eisvei Rav Nachman. So he asked a question, Rav Nachman. Is that true that she can say in Shakli Didi Shakli? Kid should be Gezel. If a person's Mekadosh a woman with something, he stole something, and then he's Mekadosh her with it. Chamas, Beganeva, or Shechatav Sel Miyada. Let's say he grabbed a sela from her hand, right? So, which is our case over here. Shechatav Sel Miyada v'Kidshi Mekadeshes. So how can you tell me that she has a right to say in Shakli Didi Shakli? We see clearly that if he grabs something and he's koin it, and then he gives it back to her, so because he was koin it and now he's giving her something, that's a Kiddushin. Probably not the best way to start a marriage, but it's a Kiddushin. Where it says, Hadam b'deshadach. It's different because there was a shidduch over here. It says Rashi, Shediber koydem l'chein. They were engaged in conversation, they were dating before, when it's rasis l'skadish loy. It was clear that she really wanted to marry him. They were dating for a long time. Dahasam ki shaska mishum denichalahu. She was silent because she really liked the guy. So that was the reason why she was shasing. It's not because she just plainly felt he had no right to do this, because she already had a prior relationship with him. So this is question 10, which I got completely wrong, which is pretty unfortunate. The question again is, Kid Shabasela Shechatach Miyada V'Hishaska Hi'imu Kadeshas. I wrote Shas Matan Mois, Lach Matan Mois, totally different sugya. That's not the correct answer. The answer simply is, so if it was b'deshadach, if they already had a shidduch mekudeshes, however, below shadach and mekudeshes. Very pasha. TB, that was TB 10, which is also kedai to see the Rashi above as well. Okay, let's look at question 9. Seems like it's the exact same question. Amr la kinsi sela zu shani chayiv l'chi l'chaz v'ermel hiskachli boy v'shaska ma'dinoi. See, this is where it's a little bit confusing because b'shas matan mois ish shadich mekadeshus v'yilav ena mekadeshus achar matan mois ena mekadeshus. Okay, it's all totally b'shas matan mois when he gave it to her, whether it was mekadeshus. Achar matan mois is not mekadeshus, as we saw before. Okay. How do we make such a distinction? So this is, I guess, not a total mistake. He says, I'm giving you this sella that I owe you. Then he says, I'm going to marry you with it. So, b'shas matan mois, if he said all this before he gave it to her, and then he gave it to her, this is similar to what we saw before. If she wants it, yes. If not, not. Well, achar matan mois, if he said all this after she already accepted it, and feel ratza in the is never good. So my ratza, my ratza. Ilay ratza the in. She says yes. Or ratza the lo. Ha ishtika. If she was silent, therefore having Kiddushin. So v'nis mekadesh stam ki hasim. Just say Kiddushin. There's mekadesh stam. El ratza study in. When does it work? B'shas matan mois. If she says yes, I'm interested. Lo ratza is the ishtika. That he said all this, gave it to her, and she said nothing, then it doesn't work. For katani de enim kadeshes, my timer, yechol meimar, because she can say, enu shakl in shakl v'dadi shakl. You gave me what was mine. Well, kasha hoch. But we had a question, as we just said before. The kitchen because of chamas of geneva, or shechatav sel miyadam. Again, if he grabs money from her, the kitchen mikadeshes. Elav shemamina habda shadich habdul shadich. That's the way the distinction, whether there was a shidduch or not. So if there was a shidduch, now let's see the question a little bit more solidly. Question 9. So if it was b'shas matan mois, so he said all this and then gave it to her, or he took it from her, and before he gave it, he said, "I'm giving this to you for Kiddushin." So if it was a shidduch, then it's mekadeshes. But if it was not a shidduch, then it's never Kiddushin, because she can say in shakli, but didi shakli. However, if let's say he gave it to her and then he said all this is called achar matan mois and mekadeshes. Even though again we saw that's possible you should be chayish in the case of shtika, fine, to require her to get a get. Kinoch nashi to Ravasi. When Ravashi had died, the Rabbanan came together to gather up all of his sayings. Says Rashi, "Niskabsu beis medrash." They went to the beis medrash. Remember, kol sheshama shemua chadash mepiv, yomarna beozni chaverav kedei v'tzarfam shelo yishtachu. They wanted all of the Torah knowledge of Ravasi to be remembered. So they said, while it's all fresh in our minds, let's go over all the things that he may have said. Just like a woman cannot be married with less than a pruta, you also can't purchase land for less than a pruta. It's beferish. The opposite. You could buy land pachas pruta. When did we say that you can use purchase land for pachas pruta, not al kesef, but using chalip? And the sanya kainin bekli afu b'shein bo shever pruta. So you can be kaina karka, but not doing a kinyan kesef, but using a kinyan chalip. Even shever pachas shever pruta. If you want to use kinyan kesef, then it must be a pruta. Hadar Yasavi Karmila Yarmei B'Hudam Shmuel Koshenu Yedei B'Tim Begin Kiddushin Lo Esak Yimohen. Someone who does not know the laws of getting Kiddushin, stay away. So Omer Rav Asi, and this is Rav Asi, Omer Rav Yochanan V'Kashin Lo Oyelam Yosim Edor Hamabul. Someone who plays around with Gittin, has no clue, all these dinim, is worse than the generation of the flood. Shnemer Aloi v'kachesh v'ratzayach v'gana v'naif paratzu, by aloi, by swearing and denying and murder and theft and adultery and breaching, creates breaches. V'damim nago, and blood to blood is touching. So my mashma, how do we see from this anything that we're talking that someone who plays around with Gittin is worse than the Mabul. Kinematargim Rav Yosef, Moldin Bonin Min Shei Chavrehain. The children were they were giving birth from women from their friends' wives. Chayvin al chayvin, so like an obligation and a punishment and a sin on a sin. Moisifin were added. Uksiv, so therefore they were engaged in Eishes Ish. Uksiv al kain te'evel haaretz, the land mourned. V'umlal kol yoshev ba, and all those who dwelled in the land will be displaced. B'chayes hasada, the animals of the field. B'oif hashamayim, the birds. V'gam digei hayam asvu, also the fish will be killed. The Gomer b'il hamabul nigzer gezer al dagim shemayam, but it didn't affect the fish, even though Hashem destroyed the whole world. He didn't do anything to the fish. The water and everything was in it, all the oceans. Nothing happened to any of the fish. Shenemar mikol asher becharava mesu. Anything on the dry land died. Below dagim shebayam. The olhacha feel dagim shebayam. So it's interesting that the way that we can see what's worse is that when it came to the Dor Mabul, they didn't destroy the fish. When it came to anyone who messes around with Eishes Ish, which has to do with reproducing, when we give the bracha that you should v'yidgal rov b'kerev aretz, you should multiply and be as many as the fish in the sea. So we see that there's a connection between fish and reproduction. So therefore, if you mess with reproduction, with Eishes Ish, with mamzerim, so that affects even the fish. This pasuk doesn't just mention one sin of noyaf; it mentions a bunch of sins. So maybe it's because all of them were done wrong. Because of the olah, because of swearing of haaretz. So maybe that one is the worst, but all the other ones are all linked together. But how do we know, again, with Eishes Ish and the like, that that's the overarching issue that then itself could be a reason to cause such destruction as we continue in Gimel Beis? Miksiv u paratsu. Paratsuksiv. It doesn't say it with a vav. So therefore Rashi says the Moisav al Indian Rishon. It doesn't connect it to the first one. Therefore each one is independent. Fine. They were continuing and sitting in Kamer Hadit Nada Isha Shehavia Chatasa Umesa. Let's say of a woman who gives birth and she brings a carbon chatas, which is one of the obligations, and then she dies. So Yaviu Yorshin Olasa. So in addition to the carbon chatas, so also she has the obligation to bring a carbon oila. Now if she died, what do? We say that her Yorshim are still allowed to bring the other carbon, the carbon ola. And that's what they should do. Now maybe who number Shmuel, let's focus on the name Shmuel, but who Shefri Shasa Michaim. It has to be that the animal which was being brought for the ola was already mafresh before she died. But if the animal was not already separated from before she died, then they would not bring an ola. Alma, what do we seek? Savar Shibud Olam Deraisa. It must be, they hold Shibud is not Deraisa, says Rashi. Hadam Rabbanan Nichse Mishubade Al Choy B'Mutal Ames. When you have an obligation connecting to pay off a debt of the dead is not a din deraisa. Why? It says Rashi, V'yu Milva Peh. It actually only has a status like an oral loan. Well, Milva Shel Shtar Shavin. Ela Milva B'Shtar Shehu Shibuda de Kasavle Nechasai Achroyin L'cha Mishabadi. Milva Peh Lo Mishabdi. So it must have only the status of like a milva peh, and therefore that in itself they don't have a chiyuv if they weren't actually separating the oila. So Rav Asi and Rabbi Yochanan Avagav Duloi Shaloi Hefri Shemachayim, even if it was not separated from before, they still have a chiyuv to bring the oila. Al Maksav Shibuda Havi Deraisa, that they still have the shibud and it's a din deraisa. The truth is, Shmuel already argued with this previously. The Amri Tavayu, why? The Rav Shmuel the Amri Tavayu, Milva Pei and Ugaiva Mina Yarshim, Veloy Mina Lakuchais. He says that when it comes to an oral loan, you do not collect from the Yorshim. If that person, you lent someone money and that person died, was a Milva Pei, you don't collect from the Yorshim. And you also don't collect from Lakuchos. Which means that if you want to be able to there's a lien on a property. There's no lien on a property if it's a milva peh. So actually we have this machlokus when it comes to yorshim and lakuchos, whether or not yorshim you can collect from them. But the point is that we already see that Shmuel holds this din that when it comes to Yerusha, that a milva pez enu gavim in a yarshin, which is the same thing as over here, that Shmuel says that the only time you have to bring a carbon oila is it was already mafresh machayim, but if it wasn't already mafresh machayim, then you don't have to because she would have deraisa. Maybe only here is Shmuel saying Mishlam the low milva ksuva b'tayra. It's not mentioned in the Torah. Avol bahach, when it comes to a carbon oila, the Torah says you must bring. You have a financial obligation, like a loan. You owe me a carbon chattas, you owe me a carbon oila. So maybe the carbon oila, since it's in the Torah, it's almost like a milva b'shtar. And then Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, that in that situation, Yutaka would still have to bring, the Yarshim would still be mechuyat to bring it. So even though, again, it's a shibud, which is not necessarily b'shtar, it's keilu b'shtar. The Torah is the shtar. Maybe only there does Rabbi Yochanan say the milva ksuba b'tayr ksuba b'shtar damyu. When it comes to the case, again, in his situation, when we're dealing with a milva peh, avol bahach, maybe he says the milva ksuba b'tayr ka milva b'shtar damyu. So maybe again going back to the case of the oila, maybe only there he says it. Avol bahach ema ma'idol Shmuel tzricha. Okay, fine. Amra Papa Hilchasa. So at the end of the day, what is the halach over here? The halach is milval pay government of yarshim, they had government of lakuchais. So actually we split it. So if it's a oral loan, the din is the yarshim still have to pay it. However, you cannot collect from the land. We don't say if there's a lien on the property in a government of lakuchais. So government of yarshim shibu de deraisa, because we said that there's a shibu de deraisa. L'chayru, that would also mean, therefore, that they would always have to bring the carbon oil, even if it wasn't designated. In the government of lakuchais to lace lay kol, because there is no voice. Look at question 10. Ha'im lahalacha milva peh government of yarshim lakuchos umatam. So again, government of yarshim because shibu de deraisa. You don't collect from lakuchais because there is no kol. Okay. Let's see if there's another question over here. Oh, question 11. TB11. Milval peh ha'im l'psak halacha shibagamara government of lakuchos min yarshim umadua. Mamish, the exact same question. TB11. I wrote Gaiva mi yorshim shibuda diraisa v'lo kuchos the lace kol. There's no voice. People don't know about it. Okay, so that is the same question as question 10. This is TB11. Okay, weiter. So we're getting close to finishing up this first Mishnah. Yeah, we're still in the first Mishnah. That she can, if she's married, there's two ways that she can be released from her marriage. Either she gets a get or her husband dies. No, Bishlam a get that the pasuk says beferish. El misa sabal manolin. How do we know that a woman will also potentially be able to go free when her husband dies? So how do we know that her husband will, when her husband dies, that she'll be able to get this? This is going to end up being TA 10. Two answers. All right, let's see what they are. So, first of all, Svarhu, it's logic. Who asrav, who sharta? He asked her, so he should be the one who frees her. Abaharayas, the asul hu sharlahu. When it comes to Arayas, says Rashi, Eshes Aviv, your father's wife, the kalato, your daughter-in-law, the Eshes Achi Aviv, your father's brother's wife. She'al yedei Kiddushin habal, Nesru l'krarivav. They're usher to the relatives. Ukshiyamas habal, when the man dies, lo sharhu sharusas kravav l'olam. When you're a karv always. You're never allowed to marry them. So, l'mashal, your father marries a woman, so it's your stepmother, and then your father dies or gets divorced. You're not allowed to ever marry her. You're not allowed to marry your father's wife. You're never allowed to marry your mother-in-law. So therefore, that shouldn't matter. We shouldn't say, oh, he can ask her, he can matter her. It's not true. It doesn't always work that way. We don't see that by Arias, so you can't use that logic. Elam de Rachmana Yavama, when it comes to a Yavama, she'ein labanim, she has no children, asura, she can't marry anyone else but the brother, which is mashma, hayesh labanim, muteris. So that's the whole diuk. The whole din from a Yavama, we can see that her husband died, so the only time we say that there's an issue of her being required to marry someone else, the brother, is only if she has no kids. But if she has children, then there's no din yibum, which means she's allowed to marry someone else. So we see that Misas Abal frees her. The Dilma ein labanim asura alma v'shar liyama. V'yesh labanim l'kol yalma nami asura. Right? Of course, that's not the din. But how do we know? Maybe also when it comes to yibum, that's the same thing. That once, even if she has kids, that's it. She can't get remarried. Elam di amar rachmana almana l'kohen gadol. When it comes to an almana, widow, who marries a kohen gadol, asura, that's not something which is allowed. But hol kohen hedget sharia, but to a kohen hedget is mutter. The fact that we say that she's not allowed to marry a kohen gadol, why? Because she's an almana, she's a widow. That's the din. A kohen gadol is not allowed to be married to an almana, which is mashma. Why does the Torah say he can't marry an almana? Must be that only a kohen gadol can't marry an almana. However, kohen hedget, or for that matter, any non-kohen, is allowed to marry an almana. So therefore, that's a raya. Must be. Why? Because her husband didn't give her a get. Her husband died, and therefore misas abal. But Dilma kohen gadol b'lav kol yama b'aseh. Maybe almana's never allowed to get remarried. So hayase maya vinte. So, what are you talking about? What exactly are we talking about with this asay? Says Rashi, shehu oimid b'faneha v'isur la v'korish sheba paku. What does that mean? So diahani misas abal. If you want to tell me that her husband dying releases her, so tishu agar, she be completely free. Idaloya hani misas abal does nothing, then tukma b'milsa kamaisa. Then she should still be like halachically like an Eshes Ish, and there should be a Chi of Karis. So alama a pikdam emisa. Why don't we say that that was removed from death? Well, kimta Allah say that no, and now it's a din asay. Midi havi absuli hamukdoshim. We see the same thing when it comes to psuli hamukdoshim. To mikara isbahu mi'ilah, that originally before you redeem it, there is a din mi'ilah, if you derive benefit from it. The asire begizav avoida, and you're not allowed to shear its wool, you're not allowed to do work with it. However, parkinhu, once you redeem it, mi'ilah leisbahu, there's no longer a din of mi'ilah, because you're allowed to eat it. However, begizav avoida asiri, but there's still some isser connected to it. In other words, we do find a middle ground by psul mikdashim. Obviously, it's not the same thing as psul mikdashim, but if you have something which is kaddish and is apostle and you're paid it, so then the din me'ilah is removed because it's not kaddish. However, there's still some isser attached to it. So we see also maybe when it comes to an isha, so she doesn't have the same status of being chayiv kares, someone who has relations with her, but maybe there is some lower level like an asay. But she's not really free to marry anyone. Rather, it's because and this is going to be one of the answers to our question, going back to again TA 10, is because the pasuk says that imagine that her husband dies, and it says, and some other man takes her. Now, what right did he have to do that? He didn't give her a get. Doesn't matter. The reality is that once he dies, that's good enough. She's allowed to get remarried. Maybe the pasuk is talking about who's the person that marries her, the yavam, but no one else is allowed to marry her. Two answers. He's not called some other guy. And furthermore, the pasuk also says that, and the later man didn't like her. Creases the road to get. Or the other man dies. The iskish misal gershon, and we're obviously the fact that we compare the two in the pasuk, we're connecting them. Ma gershon sharia begomeres av misa sharia begomeres. So therefore, we see that her husband dying frees her completely. So let's look at question 10. We learn now from either pen yomos milchama, he dies in a war, v'yishachar yikachena. Oh, the fact that it says custom sever krisos. Oh, ki yomos to isha charon. So we make this hekesh misa to gershon, and just like gershon giving a get frees her completely, so too by misa zabal will free her completely. Adkan.